A woman steps into a Strasbourg street and begins to dance. No music. No celebration. She keeps moving for hours, then days. Within weeks, hundreds may be convulsing beside her. Some collapse. Some reportedly die. And the authorities decide the cure is to make them dance even more. You are about to reconstruct the dancing plague of 1518 from chronicles, medical records, and official decisions that survived the century. By the end, you will know what likely seized Strasbourg, and why the most disturbing part was not the dancing, but the cure. It is July 1518. You are standing on a narrow street in Strasbourg, then a prosperous city of the Holy Roman Empire. The summer air hangs between crowded houses. Waste runs through open gutters. Church bells divide the day into hours of labor, prayer, and fear. Then a woman later identified as Frau Trophia walks into the street. She begins to dance. At first, you might assume she is drunk, performing, or mocking someone. But her movements do not stop. She stamps, spins, and jerks without musicians or applause. Her body appears trapped in a rhythm nobody else can hear. Hours pass. Her clothing becomes soaked with sweat. Her feet bruise against the stones. Still, she moves. Accounts written after the event say she continued for days, collapsing from exhaustion only to rise and begin again. Her husband allegedly begged her to stop. Neighbors watched. Priests searched for a moral explanation. Then the impossible behavior spread. Within days, dozens of people had joined her. Later accounts place the number in the hundreds, although the exact peak remains disputed. They did not move together like trained dancers. They convulsed, staggered, and cried out. Some begged for help while their legs continued beneath them. This was not a festival. It looked like possession, moving from body to body. But here is the first thing the legend often leaves out. Strasbourg was already sick before anyone started dancing. The region had endured brutal harvest failures. Grain prices rose. Hunger weakened families who had little protection against disease. Syphilis had spread through Europe. Smallpox and leprosy remained constant threats. Religious authorities warned that suffering could be punishment for sin. You lived in a world where a ruined crop was not merely bad weather. It could mean that God was angry. A fever might be an infection, or a curse. A sudden spasm could be interpreted as the grip of a saint whose power had been offended. One figure inspired particular terror, Saint Vitus. Across parts of medieval Europe, people believed Saint Vitus could afflict sinners with involuntary dancing. Similar outbreaks had appeared long before 1518. In 1374, groups reportedly danced through communities along the Rhine. Smaller episodes followed in other regions. So when bodies began moving uncontrollably in Strasbourg, the population already possessed a terrifying explanation. They had been cursed. And belief matters here. If everyone around you recognizes certain symptoms as the mark of supernatural punishment, your mind has been given a pattern. Under extreme pressure, that pattern can become physical. But Strasbourg's leaders did not treat the dancers as frauds. They treated them as patients, and made a catastrophic decision. City officials consulted physicians. The doctors rejected an astrological cause and reportedly diagnosed an excess of hot blood. Their theory followed humoral medicine: the body contained fluids whose imbalance could produce illness. The afflicted, they reasoned, needed to dance until the fever burned itself out. So the government cleared space for them. Guild halls were opened. A stage may have been constructed near the grain market. Professional dancers and musicians were hired to keep the victims moving. Guards were assigned to prevent interruptions. Imagine the scene. You are exhausted, frightened, and barely able to control your limbs. Instead of removing you from the crowd, the city places you on a public stage. Drums strike. Pipes shriek. Spectators gather. Every movement confirms that something powerful is happening. And now other vulnerable people can see exactly what the affliction looks like. The authorities had created a theater for contagion. Reports described the dancers continuing until their feet bled. Some collapsed. Later chronicles claimed that several died each day from exhaustion, strokes, or heart failure, though historians caution that the surviving sources do not prove a reliable death toll. That uncertainty matters. The event was real, but its most gruesome numbers may have grown in the retelling. The official response, however, is documented clearly enough to expose the central horror. The city tried to cure involuntary dancing with compulsory dancing. At this point, you have probably heard the famous explanation: poisoned bread. Rye contaminated by ergot fungus can cause convulsions, hallucinations, burning sensations, and terrifying delusions. Ergotism is real. Its symptoms once devastated communities, and chemicals derived from the fungus are related to compounds used in LSD. It sounds perfect. A poisoned food supply. A hallucinating population. Hundreds dancing until they collapse. But the theory begins to crack when you examine the behavior. Severe ergot poisoning restricts blood flow and can cause intense pain, gangrene, seizures, and muscular spasms. Victims may be unable to walk, much less dance for days. It also struggles to explain why the outbreak followed a culturally recognizable form associated with divine punishment. Poisoning could affect many people. But why would they perform the same feared behavior? Why would the symptoms intensify in public spaces filled with music and expectation? And why would removing the ritual environment appear to help end the crisis? Ergot remains popular because it gives you a physical villain, one fungus, one loaf of bread, one solved mystery. The more disturbing explanation does not live in the grain. It lives in the crowd. But before we get to that, you need to understand something even stranger. Strasbourg's leaders eventually reversed course and began fighting music itself. By late summer, the treatment had clearly failed. The council changed its diagnosis. The dancers were no longer suffering from heat that needed release. They were victims of divine displeasure. Music was restricted. Public dancing was forbidden. Even certain forms of entertainment were suppressed. The afflicted were separated from the spectacle that officials had built around them. Some were reportedly transported to a shrine associated with Saint Vitus near Saverne. There, priests conducted a ritual. The dancers were led around an altar. They wore red shoes used in the ceremony. Crosses were drawn on the soles and tops. Holy water, prayer, and religious objects replaced musicians and stages. To a modern observer, this sounds like superstition replacing bad medicine. Yet psychologically, the ritual may have served a purpose. The victims believed a saint could curse them. Now recognized authorities were announcing that the curse could be lifted. The frightening public performance ended. The afflicted were removed from the crowds, given a new script, and told that recovery was possible. Gradually, the dancing subsided. There was no laboratory result. No recovered poison. No single confession that solved the case. The same cultural machinery that may have helped unleash the outbreak was turned in reverse. Fear had given the illness a shape. Ritual gave it an ending. Modern historians and medical researchers often point toward mass psychogenic illness, sometimes called mass sociogenic illness. That label does not mean the dancers were pretending. It means severe psychological distress may produce genuine physical symptoms that spread through observation, expectation, and social reinforcement. Tremors, fainting, paralysis, nausea, screaming, and trance-like behavior have appeared in groups without a shared toxin or infectious pathogen. The symptoms are real. The suffering is real. The transmission route is belief. In Strasbourg, the necessary ingredients were already present: hunger, disease, religious terror, social pressure, and a population familiar with stories of dancing curses. Frau Trophia may have been the spark, though even her exact role comes to us through imperfect records. Once people saw the behavior, the city amplified it. Musicians supplied rhythm. Officials validated the diagnosis. Crowds created an audience. Every new dancer became evidence that the curse was spreading. You do not need to consciously decide to join. Your brain constantly reads the bodies around you for danger. One person panics, and your pulse rises. A crowd runs, and you may run before knowing why. Under sufficient stress, the boundary between fear and physical control becomes frighteningly thin. And that brings you to the main reveal. The dancing plague may not have been an inexplicable medieval madness. It may have been an extreme version of something your nervous system still does today. The strongest grounded explanation is not poisoned bread, supernatural possession, or a secret conspiracy. It is a feedback loop between unbearable stress, culturally programmed fear, and public reinforcement. The people of Strasbourg lived at the edge of survival. They believed involuntary dancing could be inflicted as punishment. When the first bodies began to move, the symptoms matched a story the entire community already understood. Then the authorities transformed that story into reality. They gathered the afflicted. They built stages. They hired musicians. They announced, through their actions, that the dancers had to continue. The treatment concentrated vulnerable people inside an environment designed to intensify the very symptom it was supposed to cure. That is the buried lesson of 1518. The city did not simply fail to stop the outbreak. For a time, it may have engineered the perfect conditions for it to grow. And when the council removed the music, ended the spectacle, isolated the victims, and offered a culturally convincing path to recovery, the epidemic faded. We cannot diagnose every dancer across 5 centuries. The records are incomplete. The number of victims is uncertain, and the claimed deaths cannot be confirmed with confidence. But that uncertainty does not erase the event. It makes it more unsettling. You are left with official orders, medical judgments, religious rituals, and fragments of testimony describing people trapped inside their own bodies. No germ was required. No poison was necessary. Only suffering, expectation, and a crowd watching closely enough for fear to become contagious. The dancing plague survives because it feels impossible. But its real warning is painfully modern. People can transmit terror without transmitting a disease, and institutions can magnify a crisis while believing they are curing it. If this broke your brain a little, subscribe. We drop one of these every week. And next time, the accused will not be able to defend himself, because he has been dead for months. The Cadaver Synod put a dead pope on trial.